Film has the ability to offer something reality cannot, a God's eye view on a character's relationship with others. There's a great joy in seeing human behavior that's been carefully combed over and curated, perfectly teetering on the edge of understanding. In other words, a film where the director trusts the audience. Quite often this occurs with a subversion of expectation, a masterclass of misdirection, a moment where you realize, oh crap, I didn't see that coming. But what happens when that doesn't work as expected?
I got the sneaking suspicion that we're not giving the people what they want.
It's been 5 years since Todd Philips' Joker from 2019. Much has changed since then in the world, namely the shocking release of Joker, Folie, Deux. If it isn't obvious already, spoilers for both Joker films are coming.
Forget your troubles, come on, get happy.
To put it simply, the sequel flopped. Big time. Every Hollywood-related news outlet is salivating at the developing story of a $190 million monolith of a budget, a fat $20 million saved for director Todd Philips himself, having a considerably less successful opening weekend than the original, which only had a budget of $55 million. Fingers are being pointed in an obvious direction to blame Warner Brothers' historic loss of investment. Todd Philips had an extraordinary amount of creative autonomy that went south financially. But what exactly were the wrong decisions that he made? Nobody expected such a grimy and disturbing original story to be followed up with a sequel that cosplays Hamilton.
For once in my life.
In some ways, though, the creative reasoning behind the music does seem to be pretty sound. Get it? Arthur is a musical personality from the get-go, and a significant aspect of his mental illness in the first film is represented by his dancing. The haunting score by Hildur Guðnadóttir creates a fitting mood, but also makes us wonder, is Arthur in his state of dementia also hearing what we're hearing? But something about the singing didn't work in the way that the dancing did. Despite the fact that they both stalled the plot equally, the dancing was received with much more enthusiasm, whereas the singing seems to have been a complete bore for most. It could be that the dancing aligned much more with audience expectation. The physicality of Arthur's dance was parallel to Joaquin Phoenix's physicality during acts of violence in the film. Physicality is something that you expect from an auteur's retelling of the story of Joker. I want to pause a bit here on the concept of audience expectation because an entire narrative has been created around why Todd Philips would take such an approach to the sequel in the first place. It's no secret that the first film ignited bits of controversy in terms of its reaction from specific viewers, mainly male ones, that deeply connected with Arthur. I'm talking about incels. Naturally, you'd think Philips and Warner Bros. Would do something to rectify the situation, especially in the current era of moral correctiveness, one that Hollywood often embraces to appear in touch with the masses, if you will. And so, there's a theory that Philips intentionally took a dump all over the sequel to laugh in the faces of all the problematic men who would be its main audience. A power move to reclaim his supervillain from those who have used it to justify violence and misogyny. But I don't think that's true. I don't think Philips made a bad movie on purpose, and there's a couple reasons for that. For one, as a director, you have to spend years developing and producing a film like this. It would be crazy to devote so much time to something that you wouldn't even try to be proud of. The other reason is that I don't actually think this Joker sequel is a bad film. In fact, I quite enjoyed it. People have criticized the film for being boring and deprived of the action that you expected coming from the first one. But I enjoyed this new take on what the Joker's life has become, a world that has deprived him of his agency. He's completely lost control over his environment and even his identity and what that means. And I think Joaquin Phoenix's performance actually benefits from this. In the first film, I thought that everything felt a little bit forced, and maybe that serviced the plot of the film because of the crazy acts that he commits at the end, but overall it just didn't feel realistic and grounded. In this film, I felt the opposite. I thought that his performance was actually quite nuanced. You see moments in his eyes where he's grappling with whether or not he actually has control over what's going on with himself, and you see that lack of control build in the form of fear. And fear is what creates violence. Fear is what leads to the acts that he committed in the first film. And so the whole time I was sitting on the edge of my seat in the second film, waiting for that moment where he would explode again. But it never came. The tension that he created felt powerful and real, and not disturbed by excessively violent outbursts that didn't feel completely earned in the last one. The identity of the Joker is no longer about him. It's this movement that has gripped the entire city, and now they're the ones carrying everything through. And I find that concept to actually resonate quite well with me. And maybe this is just because of who I am as somebody who tries to make content that is consumed by others, but it feels like once I put things out there, I lose control of what these things are. This newly evolved Joker feels actually quite relatable. Maybe Todd Phillips felt that way as well. The other thing that drew me in was this connection between mental illness and capital punishment. You have this situation that's rapidly developing across America where men, mentally ill men, are committing more and more acts of mass violence. Later in court, their mental illness serves to save them from a more brutal punishment.
What do you get?
I don't think so.
When you cross a mentally ill loner with a society that abandons him and treats him like...
What makes this really complicated is the reality of mental illness. It's not a black and white issue. It's not something that you can simply diagnose. We have this incredibly difficult problem of having one side desperately trying to prove their innocence, of trying to prove their mental illness, and other sides trying to erase it. Here, with Arthur, it becomes even more interesting because his lawyer, who is theoretically helping him escape a scenario where the rest of his life is surrounded by guards who control every aspect of his life. And yet in doing so, she has to diminish who he is as a man, diminish him to his mental illness. But then you have the other side with Lady Gaga's character, who is trying to elevate his personal image. She's trying to tell him how important he is to her and to the rest of the world, but in doing so, she's trapping him within the reality of a life behind bars or even the death penalty. You have this web of relationships, of contradictions, of paradoxes. It's actually quite brilliant. Obviously, it doesn't go super deep. At the end of the day, it is a supervillain movie based on some comics. I'm not sure it actually has that much to say about the extensive problems that we have as a society within our justice system, but it's a unique way to tie reality and film together. I think with the first film, you're coming off the golden age of superhero films. You fast forward to 2024 when the sequel comes out, the opposite is the case. I think the individual merit of this film has to be separated from the fact that audiences may not have wanted Joker anymore to begin with. You have these scenes of Joker with the girl that lives in his building. You have these interactions between them. You have this beautiful montage of their relationship growing. And at some moment, there's a reveal that she doesn't know him at all. And suddenly, as an audience member, you go, oh crap. That was all just mental delusion. I was in Joker's own head, imagining things that he was imagining. I wasn't actually seeing reality in the way that I'm used to. And suddenly, it felt like the film had found something kind of genius, where you could actually inhabit Joaquin Phoenix's Joker's own brain. And then Todd Phillips did the unforgivable. He went back and he showed the montage again in a way that made things so overtly obvious that it killed the magic of the film for me. Because ultimately what it told me is that Todd Phillips didn't trust the audience to figure that out for themselves. I have to wonder at this lack of trust and where it could come from. And I perused the internet for news about Joker 2, news about Todd Phillips' creative decisions, news about how executives handled this entire process. I wanted insight, anything, into why this entire project, this almost $200 million project, suffered from what seems like a lack of leadership. I went online and all I saw was news about how the film is not making any money. Joker 2 has developed a reputation as a bad film, and I can't help but wonder if that's just because it's not making enough money.